The Secrets of Star Wars is brought to you by the StarQuest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give.
Hi, this is Ashley Eckstein, the voice of Ahsoka Tano from Star Wars, and you're listening to the Secrets of Star Wars podcast. May the Force be with you.
Hello there.
It's a power that Jedi have that lets them control people and make things float.
Impressive. Every word in that sentence was wrong.
Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi. You're my only hope.
This station is now the ultimate power in the universe.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
It's against my programming to impersonate a deity.
That's not how the Force works.
Force is with me, and I am with the Force, and I fear nothing.
Remember, the Force will be with you, always.
Hey everyone, I'm Angela Sealana, and you're listening to The Secrets of Star Wars, where we talk about everything connected to that galaxy far, far away. From movies to books to TV shows and more, we're looking at the deeper themes and meanings found in Star Wars. And maybe today, not so deep, but we'll see how it goes. So today we are having fun with two heroes of all of the Star Warses. We have C3PO and R2D2. And on the crew today, we have Jedi Master Ikrit, aka Thomas Salerno. Hello, Thomas.
Hello, Angela.
And we also have the Guardian of the Wills, Robert King. Thank you for joining us, Robert.
Oh, it's good to be here.
Yes, great to have you both. And of course, I'm known as the Bendu, the one in the middle. And so at some point, someone had the bright idea that we ought to not only talk about why we love C3PO and R2D2, but also look at every time they save the day in Star Wars, which honestly, we probably will not be doing because it would be a very long episode. So we're just going to be limiting ourselves to the current canon of movies and TV shows and really, realistically speaking, our brains, because there is just so much that we could possibly say. So we will see how much we cover today, but we will have fun doing it. And before we dive in, we just like to take a brief moment to recognize the people who make this podcast possible in your ears, our patrons, including Daniel C., John M., Ruth B., and Paul K. Thank you all. And if you enjoy and appreciate our work here at StarQuest, but you are not yet a patron, please consider helping StarQuest continue our mission. And you can see how and also learn about cool behind the scenes benefits that you will get by going to sqpn.com/give. Okay, so first of all, guys, let's talk about C3PO and R2D2. Elders first. We start with R2E. Why do we love R2 as a fandom, I guess I could say? And what makes him a hero from your perspective? Thomas, we'll start with you.
I feel like why we as fans love R2, I feel like Dave Filoni said it best. He once said that R2D2 is like the family dog. And I really think that there's a lot of truth to that. He just seems so much a part of Star Wars that you can't imagine Star Wars without R2D2 in it. Like, not only just from everything he does over the course of the movies, but just like he has this very, like family dog or childlike quality about him that really sort of, I feel almost like embodies the fun of Star Wars. And and everyone all around the world recognizes R2D2, you know, like he's on everything, coffee mugs, t-shirts, you know, like he's just one of those iconic Star Wars characters that even if you've never seen Star Wars in your life, you know R2D2, like, you know, people even use him as like shorthand for stuff. I mean, like my family, we used to have this stand-up like portable air conditioner that had kind of a dome top, and we always referred to it as R2. We were like, "Hey, can you bring R2 up from the basement? Or, you know, we've got to change the change the water in R2 and all that stuff." So it's like, I feel like he's just such an iconic character, and Yeah, and I'm sure we'll get into later, his sort of buddy relationship with 3PO is almost like the heart of Star Wars in a way.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Robert?
Yeah, I mean, I almost feel like the family dog it's that may be how R2 started, kind of like Chewbacca kind of started as being like an animal companion character, but developed more and more humanity as the series went on. And strangely enough, for R2, I think what really grabbed me and convinced me of I don't know, charm and like just delightfulness as a character is R2's voice. Just the expressiveness of those beeps and whistles, that you can't understand what he's saying, but you really kind of can. and that's there right from the beginning, and it just, like, I think that's what instantly hooked my heart and made me think, oh yeah, R2's an awesome character.
Yeah, totally. I agree. And I will say, I can't really think of R2 as a dog. If he is a dog, he is a very bratty dog.
If I remember the Filoni quote, like, in its entirety, I think he compared R2 to a dog because he was contrasting him with Chopper, who he described as a cat.
Who is definitely a cat.
Yeah.
Definitely, without question. I mean, he even purrs, so. But yeah, R2 has gained more and more attitude over the years, I would say. Well, maybe not. I don't know. If you look at, I guess I would say over the years as far as our years, but if you look at the canon and the development of the canon, I would say R2 gained more of like the older gentleman dog, like the close to the end of life dog that just, really tugs at your heartstrings, like at the end of episode 9, where he's just like kind of saving the day with just loving, people. And even episode 7 where was it 8? It was 8 where so in 7 he woke up, and then in 8 he kind of, showed Luke really what his life was all about, right? By showing him Leia's hollow message. When Luke was being anti-Luke, I guess you could say.
Oh, that was a great moment because Luke was so offended that R2 would bring that up.
That is an attitude moment as well. I mean, yeah. That's that friend that kind of like, just says that one thing that they know will push your button, and then they're really smug at the end of it. That's how I interpret it anyway. But yeah, I think R2 definitely, I think you all described the reasons why we love him. And I think the reason that he is a hero is because he truly does save the day so many times. But he also is so beloved and lovable. And we want him to be okay. All right, so then moving into 3PO. Definitely kind of the butler character, right? He also has a little bit of like absent-minded professor qualities to him as well. And yet, despite the annoying moments, he is also very lovable as well. And the fandom has just gotten behind C3PO, I mean, after all these years, and just totally loves this character, which is so fascinating to me because he truly can be genuinely annoying and keeping everyone behind in many ways throughout the story of 3PO. So what do you think about him? Why do we love him despite his annoyingness? And also, would you describe him as a hero?
So I I've always had trouble kind of understanding 3PO apart from R2. I always see them as, I mean, they're very much a comedy duo in the very classic, like early to mid 20th century style. You've got Laurel and Hardy and Abbott and Costello and R2 and 3PO. And, so 3PO is the straight man in the duo.
Yes.
Which is great because, R2 has all the punchlines and it forces you to make up the punchlines in your head, right? Which is genius. But that means that 3PO, at least originally, is kind of this deliberately unlikable character. 3PO is the one we laugh at in this comedy duo. And later movies sort of developed him more as a character and made him more sympathetic. But there's something about just being the butt of all the jokes that is, I think, essential to 3PO's charm. And maybe I'm too much of like an originalist or a purist in this, but yeah, I don't know. That's my take anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right, Robert, in the sense that the fact that we laugh at him almost makes him endears him to us in a way. And I remember I actually put 3PO on my top characters list when we did the top Star Wars characters countdown. And I think that's probably it. But both his Laurel and Hardy relationship with R2D2 and just I think a lot of 3PO's lines are just genuinely funny. Like something about his, and especially Anthony Daniels' delivery.
Yeah.
Is just so funny to me. Like my brother and I are constantly quoting like C3PO all the time because we just think like and even when 3PO is mean, he's funny. You'll be malfunctioning within a day, and you're saying scrap pile. Like the things he says can be so mean, but by the end of the story, especially in Return of the Jedi, like you see how in the first movie he says, "I'm not very good at telling stories. I'm not a storyteller." And by Return of the Jedi, what's he doing? He's recounting their heroic exploits to the Ewoks. So they did almost build in a kind of arc for him. And he almost becomes like, at some moments, him and R2 are very much like a Greek chorus where they're commenting on things that are happening. Like one of my favorite little 3PO moments is when in Return of the Jedi, they all get on the stolen Imperial shuttle to go off and sneak past the Death Star, and 3PO just sighs and goes, "Here we go again." and to me, that not only references like the adventures we know, it's almost like he's referencing a bunch of other adventures that have happened but we have never seen, or that were like filled in later in comic books and stuff. But just that he's like, "Here we go again." It's just like
I'd almost forgot how much I hate space travel.
Right, yeah. It's little moments like that I think really add depth to the story, and 3PO's got a lot of those moments.
Yeah, I one of the reasons that we love to laugh at him is because he is truly just trying to fulfill his programming. Like, he really wants to help people so badly, and they don't want his help a lot of times. So the poor guy. That's why it is just tragically funny. So
I'm not really interested in your opinion, 3PO. Like, that's another thing. His back and forth with Han is, especially in Empire, is
brilliant.
Is just hilarious.
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely comedic relief. I think one of my all-time favorite lines of 3POs is "Thank the Maker." I just love, of course, as a Catholic, a devout religious person, as someone who's very spiritual, I enjoyed that very much because it's kind of ironic that a droid would say something that just sounds so religious. Like it sounds like it's referring to a deity. And of course he says, it's against my programming to impersonate a deity.
Yeah. In episode 9, he refers to that memory bypass thing as sinful.
So yeah, I love so many of his lines. I think, if R2 had if we could hear R2's lines, we would love them even more. But because of C3PO's lines, we love R2D2, and then vice versa, right? All of the jesting and everything, given a hard time to C3PO on R2's behalf. That's partially why we love C3PO. So yeah, I mean, these guys are great. So getting into then, well, I don't know if we answered the question if C3PO is a hero. I guess we will answer that by the end of this.
He certainly becomes more heroic as the series progresses.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking of actually how he was developed a great deal during the Clone Wars animated series. And he becomes a bit the conscience of both Amidala and to some extent Anakin in that series, which kind of, given his position, is a heroic thing. But I think one of the things that was absolutely clear in episode 9 was, here's 3PO truly acting in a heroic way. Allowing himself to be reset and to lose all of who he identifies himself as being in order to help his friends. That's as heroic as anything anyone else does in the Star Wars series.
Yeah, self-sacrifice really essentially is what it is. And I, as a Christian, of course, I couldn't help but watch that scene and think about no greater love hath any man than this, right? To lay down one's life for one's friends. And that's exactly what he does. And he calls them his friends, I'm looking on my friends one last time. And so, he definitely, I think, becomes a hero through and through by the end of that. And it's what's interesting about it, like you were saying, Robert, is, here is this protocol droid who, of all the droids, you would think, like, this is the droid that is most droid-like, right? Like a protocol droid, like there are certain things that are programmed in as this is right, this is wrong, this is good, this is bad, this you do, this you don't do. And he refers to that many, many times throughout, the Star Wars stories, about what's his programming, what his programming is. And he's very proud of it. He's very proud that he knows over 6 million forms of communication.
Yeah.
Very proud of it. And also very clearly tells people when something is not in his programming. Also very proud of that. So you could say in a way that he is kind of a built-in conscience, but also not the kind of droid that you would think would then do something like giving oneself up in a way that is kind of loving. This is where the fantasy sort of comes into it, I think, right? Versus sci-fi, talking about droids and consciences and love and all that. So.
Yeah, because they're robots, but they're also not. in a way. It's very strange, and Star Wars has never like tried to go into that in the way that, say, Star Trek has with Data.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like it's good that way, to just kind of like keep the fantasy of it, like sort of obliquely address it, but don't directly address the question of like, are these more than machines?
Well, I mean, there is the droid revolt in Solo.
Right, yeah.
And what's her name? L3. And the way she really does bring out that question of, are we not persons just as much as anybody else? And, from their behavior, boy, they sure seem to be, and yet they are absolutely treated as property. And so on the one hand, yeah, it's a fun little fantasy. Yeah, it makes the fantasy of the world work. Kind of in the same way that like Tolkien in his later life was struggling with the orcs.
Yes.
Because when he first started writing, the orcs were just monsters. But as he wrote The Lord of the Rings, they became characters. And if they're characters, they're people.
Yep.
And if they're people, is there such a thing as a good orc? Is it right to just kill orcs indiscriminately? Yeah, they cease to be monsters. And I think Star Wars has kind of tried to have both. Yes, they're quirky AI objects who, we can use as the butt of jokes. And at the same time, they are, deep characters with, who can act as a conscience and who charm the audience and you have an emotional connection to. And
I feel like the droids almost represent what, to bring it back to Tolkien for a second, in his essay on fairy stories, he has a section on beast fables, where it's like, in beast fables, and this includes more modern stuff like Redwall, the animals are just people in animal clothes, essentially. That they are human beings because they act like human beings, they talk like human beings, they think like human beings. They're not really beasts in a sense. They just happen to appear as such. And I almost feel like the droids in Star Wars are like the talking animals in a beast fable.
That's a great point. I think if we start looking at the timeline of these characters, these two characters, obviously we know that 3PO was created by Anakin for his mom. Am I getting that right? Am I remembering that right?
Yeah, to help with her chores. What a good son.
I don't want to do the chores. I'll make a droid to do them for me.
There you go. But what's interesting is that, to me, Anakin seems to have a closer relationship with R2 throughout the stories. So much so that he puts himself in harm's way to go and save R2 at certain points. And if you look at their story in episode 1, where Anakin is in that Naboo starfighter and it just takes off, right? Because he's trying to do what Obi-Wan said and go hide, and he hides in a star, of course, in the starfighter. And it's on autopilot, and he's freaked out, and he has the astromech turn off autopilot, and it ends up saving him. And I wonder if that moment sort of was pivotal in little Annie's life. That, is interesting because he ends up creating this bond with R2. And it's even more ironic in his case because he ends up becoming, quote unquote, more machine than man, right? At the end of his story. And he has this close relationship with this machine, So I don't know if you have any thoughts about Anakin's relationship with R2, but I just found that to be particularly fascinating as I was looking at just, that timeline.
It was something that, sort of reviewing the Wikipedia article, just to remind myself of some things. I had forgotten R2 and 3PO were the witnesses at Anakin and Padme's marriage. And they were actually sort of wedding gifts to each other. That's the point where R2 becomes Anakin's droid and 3PO becomes Padme's droid.
Officially, yeah.
Yeah. And so there's the history there, but there's also that they, at least for the prequel trilogy, they have this symbolism of the relationship.
Almost like the rings that they could never wear.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right, though, that Anakin has this relationship with R2 and refuses to have R2's memory wiped ever.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
In order to maintain that relationship.
Isn't there I don't think it's canon now, but isn't there a story where like all of these adventures are essentially being told by R2D2 that he's the narrator of Star Wars in some sense? I think there's an old legend story that establishes that like, since he has all the memories of Anakin and Luke's stories, that he becomes the recorder, and that his memories form the foundation for the basis for the later Journal of the Wills document.
I hadn't heard that. I am remembering like early interviews that George Lucas gave, where he talked about telling the story from the droid's point of view. That was one of the deliberate choices he made. So the first real characters we're introduced to are R2 and 3PO.
Right.
Yeah. Of course, as more of the stories progress, I'll be curious to see how many more of the new Star Wars stories that are created will include R2 in some way. It seems like they're trying to include the droids, at least with like a cameo or something in the new stories, but of course that may not be the case. It may just be the Skywalker saga where we can say that R2 is perhaps the narrator, the primary source, if you will.
Yeah.
But so talking about this whole episode, this whole discussion that we're having, I don't remember who it was on the panel that said we really ought to do an episode on just all the times that they saved the day. So we already talked about the end of 9, or kind of, I guess, the middle of 9, where 3PO gives himself up. I have to say about that I just love that he's willing to do this, and at the hands of Babu Frick and all of these little Babu Frick and Co. like these little crazy little creatures that are just like pulling at wires, and it looks chaotic when you look at it. But do you guys have a favorite moment when either of these two droids, quote unquote, save the day?
Mine has got to be when R2 fixes the hyperdrive on the Millennium Falcon in Empire Strikes Back, because it takes place in the context of an argument he's having with 3PO. Because R2 had been in the middle of putting 3PO back together because he had been taken apart by the Ugnaughts. And so 3PO's hobbling around on one leg, yelling at R2D2, is like, finish putting me back together. And meanwhile, like, R2's like fiddling with the hyperdrive, and where before 3PO had told him, like, because where did you learn that? And you know better than to trust the city's computer terminal or something like that.
A strange computer.
Strange computer, yeah. And that R2 just, like, as 3PO's yelling at him, R2, like, turns on the hyperdrive. Then 3PO starts praising him, and they both fall over because the ship accelerates. And
there's a great line in that moment where I think R2's going to try to fix the hyperdrive, and 3PO is still in progress of being put back together.
Yeah.
And he says something like, I'm standing here in pieces and you're having delusions of grandeur.
Yeah. And before that, he totally he's mean 3PO because like he doesn't understand why they haven't gone to light speed yet, and Chewbacca's running around trying to fix it, and 3PO looks at Chewbacca and is like, noisy brute. And I'm like, what?
Yeah, talk about delusions of grandeur, right?
Yeah. Well, he's got his priorities.
See this much 3PO? I'm like, come on. You're supposed to be a protocol droid. You're supposed to be polite to people.
Yeah, I guess that's one of the ironic qualities of 3PO is that he insists on everyone being so polite, and then he's just not sometimes. Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's this kind of implicit class structure that's, in Star Wars just as much as it is in so much of fantasy, where you're kind of assuming this vaguely medieval class structure. You've got your nobility, and you've got your working class, and you've got your servant class, and none of the classes really, respect the others all that much. But 3PO is always very, very polite to anybody in the noble class, right? But Han and Chewie, not so much.
Yes, definitely. Robert, do you have a moment that stands out to you, a heroic moment from the droids?
Gosh, I mean that moment in Empire is hard to beat because it's both so heroic and so comedic at the same time. It's brilliant. I think R2's service in Jedi, sort of the whole role that R2 plays in the plan, the worst plan ever developed, but that works out completely perfectly. From presenting the holographic message to firing the lightsaber to pushing 3PO off the barge so they can get rescued.
Totally.
Like just that whole. I mean, you could do like a Mission Impossible style movie.
Oh, yeah.
About R2 infiltrating Jabba's palace, and it would be brilliant.
Him electrocuting Salacious Crumb.
Yes.
Save 3PO from getting his photoreceptor.
That was so satisfying, wasn't it?
Yeah.
He got what was coming to him.
But and again, I'm not sure it's like a single moment, but for 3PO, I just, this is one of my favorite things about the Clone Wars, and I'm on record as not being a huge Clone Wars fan, but I really loved the way 3PO just increasingly tried to call Padme and Anakin back to the light, back to the truth, and to make them aware of what they were doing and what the consequences were, without actually having the power to do anything about it. And that, I think, was I mean that's the long heroism of living according to your principles in a world that is running against them, and I find that really inspiring and heroic.
Well, too, with that, thank you. That was so poignant. I appreciate, and I don't have all of his lines in front of me, obviously, all of his dialogue, but I want to say that 3PO tends to be someone who, asks a lot of questions.
Yes.
As a means of saying, well, aren't we supposed to do this? Or like he's trying to get clarification, right? He's trying to understand what's going on. And that's actually a great strategy that we don't do oftentimes in daily life. We don't like ask questions to clarify with someone or even to help them along on that journey of conscience, right? It just tends to be for us, I would say, maybe speaking for myself, I tend to assume that I know what people are thinking. Mm-hmm. And often that leads to catastrophe. It leads to not a good place. So it is, in a way, yeah, I can definitely admire that about 3PO, that he asks a lot of questions, and I should do that more.
I like, the one point where he seemingly didn't ask enough questions was before the operation at Jabba's palace, because he had no clue about that.
Yes.
And as he's being led away, I love where he's like, what possibly could have come over Master Luke? Was it something I did? He never expressed any unhappiness with my work. And
yes. Well, yeah, there is a certain inability to just trust in 3PO, isn't there? So, this is not going according to protocol. Mm-hmm. What is going on? And so yeah, it's like and I think you're exactly right, Angela. It's like he's trying to reconcile truths that seem to conflict with each other. Like, I can't possibly believe that my master would do something improper, and yet, so how do I understand this? How do I reconcile this? How do I get them to articulate what's going on? And so he's also that perfectly honest character who's incapable of lying and it like doesn't understand even what a lie could be. Which is, I mean, that a little bit undermines the virtuousness, like the strength of his heroism, but I don't think it undermines like the value of his example in the story and his role in holding everybody to that standard of truth.
Yeah. Now his constant asking of questions and trying to reconcile what's going on around him often leads him to just spin out of control, like in a complete freak out, which is so funny. But meanwhile, R2 chooses violence so many days of the week.
Not as much as Chopper, but
not nearly as much as Chopper.
Choose violence, yeah.
But if you kind of look at like all the times that R2 saves the day, like, yes, of course, he slices and does all of the, hacking or whatever it is that he does mechanical wise. But he also uses that zapper, and he uses his smoke, and he uses his other tools that he has, his Swiss Army knife, to freak people out, to create distractions, to, stave off enemies and whatnot. As I was going through their great moments, I guess you could say, I discovered, so we're talking about Jabba's barge, right? Okay. And it's so memorable that R2, like C3PO is having one of his freakouts, doesn't know what's going on, and R2 just bumps him off of the barge and then follows him off, right? Just to get them off so that they don't die. And I discovered as I was going through the Clone Wars that Padme ends up bumping C3PO off of where they were onto a moving train during some crossfire, just to basically, she is R2 in that moment, but it is earlier in the canon. So given that R2 is initially her droid, I just think they probably did that intentionally to connect Padme with her droid's later actions in episode 6. That she bumps C3PO off of a vehicle so that there's like that connection between her and R2. I loved that.
I'm not remembering in Attack of the Clones in episode 2 when 3PO gets bumped over onto the assembly line conveyor belt.
I think he just literally walks off. I think he walks. Yeah, he just either he walks off or he loses his balance or something. They're like on an edge of a drop off.
I remember that. Yeah,
and I think that's how he ends up there.
Machines making machines. How perverse.
Yeah, and then
3PO does end up sort of getting bumped into awkward situations quite often.
Like being on a battle droid's body.
Right.
I'm so confused.
Oh, this is such a drag. That's another fantastic line where his head's getting dragged in the sand.
Again, it's Anthony Daniels' just brilliant comedic timing and delivery. Yeah. And by the way, if anyone has not listened to the audiobook of his memoirs, you really should, because it's like having C3PO narrate the whole book to you. And it's brilliant.
Yeah, he has great stories about fitting into the costume, which sounded absolutely terrible. In the first movie it was horrific. But he's just such a delight to listen to. He has, I suppose, I don't know how much 3PO's character was influenced by Anthony Daniels' characterization or his personality, but now when you listen to Anthony Daniels speak about Star Wars, I don't know if it's intentional, he just falls into that character, but it just sounds like he is 3PO, you know what I mean? So okay,
we can't kind of talk about R2 as a character without mentioning that, like, it's escaping me, the gentleman who created R2's sounds, because without those sounds, R2 is not a character, really. He's just another robot.
Well, it wasn't Ben Burtt, right? Because Ben Burtt was, I think, like the second generation of Star Wars audio engineers. But I don't have that offhand. I don't know I think Robert has some sort of source of knowledge pulled up online.
I do. I've got Wikipedia open here, and it talks about Kenny Baker, of course, who did the
Kenny Baker, of course, being the physical
portrayal.
Yes.
But it's not mentioning the sound design in here. I could Google a little bit.
Because like those sounds are just brilliant. Like we said, you can sort of guess what he's saying, even when none of it sounds like words. Like,
then it's very limited. The kinds of sounds are very limited, obviously. But kind of one of my favorite R2 sounds is his sort of like his sighing sound.
Or his, like, when he's afraid. Ooh, ooh, that's always fun. Or that scream that he does if he falls over. Or
oh my gosh, hilarious!
What's that like? And of course his raspberry sound is really fun.
Yeah, I'm finding Ben Burtt was credited as the sound designer.
Okay.
To create the original voice of R2 that everything else is based on.
He created a lot of the fantastic. I think he was the one that did the lightsaber sound and there's so many of the ships sounds. Awesome. Fantastic. Let's see. Well, I would say what sticks out to me as far as a heroic moment for R2 has to be, I mean, it would be a crime if we didn't mention this. The trash compactor.
Yes. Oh gosh. Yes. Yes.
I mean, how can you not love just the dramatic tension of that moment? Just the yelling and the screaming over the comm and then 3PO is just like
they're dying.
They're dying.
Yes, and R2 is like asking for more information, and 3PO is like, no, shut them all down, shut them.
Right.
Which I guess that was a moment where it was 3PO who truly saved the day, because if he hadn't said that, who knows what would have happened.
And he's saving the day by simply remembering to turn the comm link back up. Oh, I forgot. I turned it off.
I love that moment, definitely. Yes. Now, one of the things that we saw later on in the heroic moments timeline was in the Ahsoka series, right? Where we saw C3PO testifying on Leia's behalf to legitimize Hera's mission to try to save Ahsoka. And I mean, obviously we talked about it when we discussed the Ahsoka series, but you know, that was particularly tender because we knew that he was standing in Leia's place.
Yeah.
And she couldn't be there. And then of course
and that Mon Mothma respects him.
Right.
I thought that was nice touch.
Yeah. Even though wasn't there a moment where they were questioning, it's like, can a droid give testimony?
Oh, that other guy. Yeah.
Senator Ziono. Yes.
I'm like, you guys have had 25,000 years of civilization, and you have not determined yet whether a droid can legally, bring testimony to a court.
Why is this a question?
There must be some legal precedent for that. You've had all these centuries, whatever.
Of all the kinds of droids, a protocol droid seems absolutely legitimate and trustworthy.
Right, to act like a surrogate for somebody. Yeah, like...
I'm just saying, L3 has things to say about this.
Oh, yeah, we've got to do an episode on L3 as well. That would be something.
I mean, we would have to include all the computer stuff in the Millennium Falcon after that.
That's right.
Yo.
I mean, that is one of the weirdest things that has happened in Star Wars
which
that just never gets mentioned ever again.
Although 3PO is like, I don't know where your ship learned to communicate, but it has a peculiar dialect. So it's like, it's almost like they retconned why the Millennium Falcon had a hard time interfacing with 3PO. That was weird.
Its British accent is almost as posh as mine. Who is this? Phoebe Waller-Bridge?
Well,
I want to mention too before we forget them. R2's initial, in the timeline, save the day experience when he saves Padme's ship from being destroyed in episode 1.
Sure.
And all the other
the blockade.
Through the blockade and all the other, what are they? Destroyed.
Just get shot off one by one.
They scream and it's horrible. And you're just like, oh.
The poor guy. I remember looking at that on YouTube one time, and somebody was like, in the comments, they said, man, R2 is going to need a lot of therapy for this. This whole crew got shot off and nobody even cared.
He got a medal, though, or whatever. They gave him a citation. Oh. Yeah. And then, of course, he essentially saves the day through all of episode 4 because he's got the Death Star plans in him the whole time.
Yep. In Rogue One, you could say. as well.
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
R2 McGuffin. Yeah.
R2 McGuffin. Oh, and like speaking of like tender 3PO moments, when they come back from the Death Star thing and R2 has been shot and he's so upset. 3PO, and he's gonna donate parts, he says. And I'm like, oh.
Yeah.
Which kind of like it finishes their arc because they start out the movie arguing and you're like, are these two even really friends? And by the end of it, he's like, I'll donate any circuits or gears or whatever.
Yeah. I think there was a Clone Wars episode where it was the one where blue guy Cad Bane is tasked with trying to get the plans for something relating to the Senate, and so he gets Toto to steal 3PO, thinking that 3PO would have the plans, but of course he finds out 3PO is just a protocol droid and has an empty brain. I think he says something like that. A droid with an empty brain. And so he goes to steal R2, and R2 is hearing that he's hiding, and he's overhearing that they're going to like peel apart, goldenrod or something piece by piece, and he's just like, he's making his little sounds like, oh, my friend, that's another one of their friendship moments where he jumps in to save 3PO and ends up, of course, being in danger as well. But I think the From a Certain Point of View book, the very first one,
yeah,
was it that one that had R2? No, I might be thinking of Chopper. Chopper is definitely a bona fide war veteran, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you could say R2 is as well because he's been in battle.
Oh,
but
yeah.
But R2, I would say, is definitely kind of like a veteran personality as well, a war veteran at the end of it. So, anything else you guys want to bring up? Any other hero moments you want to bring up?
I'm sure we're forgetting a million of them, and our fans will tell us in the comments which ones we've forgotten.
I do really appreciate that the comic relief in the movies and the stories generally also are allowed to be heroes. They're not just comic relief; they're heroic comic relief. And I really appreciate that because it's like, sure, people make fun of me and laugh at me and whatever, but ignore me, but I can still be a hero, just like these droids, and I think they're great role models in that sense, I think that's part of the affection and the connection that I have for them.
Yeah. For sure. I think probably R2 was the most unifying portion of episode 8 and 9 for all Star Wars fans. His actions in episodes 8 and 9, particularly in 8, with Luke and his connection with Luke. Also C3PO, everyone loves C3PO as well. And just the comic relief when Han and Leia meet each other after a long time. They see each other in episode 7, and 3PO just comes out with this bizarre red arm and just makes these awkward comments.
That's why that gets me every single Captain Solo. He just leans into frame, and it's one time, and even though I had seen it several times before, there was one time I was watching it actually jump scared me because I had like zoned out for a moment, and then 3PO comes to the screen. I'm like, oh, what?
Yeah. So they really unite the fandom and bring us all together and bring the story together in so many wonderful ways that they should probably get a little bit more credit for. I mean, I know we give them a lot of credit, but I think they should get more credit for it.
Well, and they set the pattern for everything else. I mean, everything that has come after, droids have been a significant part of the franchise. They've been significant characters in Rebels, in in the sequels, in in all of the Star Wars story movies, even in The Mandalorian, IG is IG-11 is a huge character, it's recognizing the role of droids all goes back to 3PO and R2 and the kind of trail they blazed for how characters work in this universe.
Absolutely. Well said. Well, everyone listening, what are your favorite R2 and 3PO moments? We want to hear your feedback. Or any Star Wars questions, comments are welcome. You can send us an email, starwars@sqpn.com, or find StarQuest on Facebook, facebook.com/StarQuestMedia. You can leave a comment there or on Instagram, where we are at StarQuest Network. And if you'd like to find us on X, you can find us there too at SQPN. If you enjoy geeking out with us on this show, you can boldly proclaim your geekiness by getting some official Secrets of Star Wars gear. Our design on like t-shirts, notebooks, stickers, other things, has some of our OG panelists' personas, and it says in Arabesh, finding hope in a galaxy far, far away, which is kind of our motto for the show. So you can check that out at sqpn.com/merch. Join us on Discord if you want to continue the conversation. We have Star Wars conversations there all the time. We share memes. We exchange funny anecdotes from our lives. And so you can join us on Discord by doing so. Just go to sqpn.com/Discord to join us there. And we will continue having fun with Star Wars in a couple of weeks with our discussion of the new Lego Star Wars miniseries, Rebuild the Galaxy. So make sure to subscribe to The Secrets of Star Wars in your favorite podcast app. And while you're at it, you can subscribe on our YouTube channel, StarQuest Media. And find previous episodes at our website, sqpn.com/Star Wars. Until next time, Thomas Salerno, thank you for talking Star Wars with me today.
Well, thank you, Angela. It was a lot of fun.
And Robert King, great to have you as well.
Thanks for having me. It's always a delight to talk Star Wars.
Yeah, this really just flew by. Thanks, everybody, for joining. And once again, I'm the one in the middle, the Bendu, Angela Sealana. Thank you for listening to The Secrets of Star Wars on StarQuest. So many stars.
Here's another podcast on the StarQuest Network you're sure to enjoy. The Secrets of Movies and TV Shows. Find it wherever fine podcasts are found or at sqpn.com/secrets.